The Literary City with Ramjee Chandran, exclusively on IndigoMusic.com.
Hello and welcome back to the Literary City podcast with me, Ramjee Chandran, here on IndigoMusic.com. My guest today is the world-famous and celebrated historian from the United Kingdom, Simon Sebag Montefiore, author of The World, A Family History. This 2-volume book of about 1,300 pages is the world's history distilled by family. I talked to Simon about how family has had a profound influence on the character of world leaders. For example, what was Hitler's mom like? This interview was recorded in front of a live audience at Blossom Book House in Bangalore.
In Europe and the United States of America, we tend to think of family as a small unit that is no longer of political importance in the age of individualism, mass politics, industrialization, and high tech, and that we no longer need families as much as we used to. There is truth in that, and in the later centuries, family takes on a different aspect. When there are not prominent families, I continue to use character and connection to tether a complex narrative. But it turns out that in our individualistic, supposedly rational world, dynasties have evolved, but not vanished. Far from it. During the American Revolution, Tom Paine insisted that a hereditary monarch is as absurd a position as a hereditary doctor. But doctors, like many other professions, were then often hereditary. In today's liberal democracies, we pride ourselves on pure rational politics without clan, kin, and connection. Certainly, family matters much less. But most politics remains as much about personality and patronage as about policy. Modern states, even in North America and Western Europe, are more complex and less rational than we like to pretend. Formal institutions are often bypassed by informal networks and personal courts that include family. In democracies or semi-democracies, one only has to think of the Kennedys and Bushes, Kenyattas and Karmas, Neros, Bhutos and Sharifs, Lees and Marcoses, demo dynasties who represent reassurance and continuity, but have, in theory, to be elected and can be unelected too. Research in today's USA, India, and Japan reveals that national dynasties are replicated locally among congressional and state lineages. And then there's the growing number of hereditary rulers in Asia and Africa who, behind the cosplay of republican institutions, are in effect monarchs. Kinship and family remain a force to be reckoned with, writes Jeroen Guindam, the doyen of dynastic historians. Personalized and enduring forms of leadership in politics and in business tend to acquire semi-dynastic traits, even in the contemporary world. A book of this scale has many themes. One is the shaping of nations by migration. We follow stable families and we follow families in movement or formed by movement. The great mass movements of families, migrations and conquests that created every race and nation. One cannot write about dynasty without religion. Rulers and dynasties governed as sacred monarchies, agents and sometimes the very personifications of divine will. A conviction that dovetailed with family to make hereditary succession seem natural, a reflection of the natural organization of society through lineage. After 1789, the theology of sacred dynasty evolved to fit new national and popular paradigms. And after 1848, mass politics. Traditional religion, bells and smells, is less predominant today. Yet our so-called secular societies are just as religious as those of our forefathers, and our orthodoxies today are just as rigid and absurd as the old religions. An overarching theme, then, is the human need for religiosity and soteriology, the seeking of salvation. providing every individual and family and nation with a righteous mission that gives meaning and shape to existence. He who has a why to live for, writes Nietzsche, can tolerate any how.
Quite some years ago, I watched a TV commercial that sort of stuck with me. It showed a montage, sepia-tinted portraits of older couples from a long time ago with rather interesting last names. Alois and Clara Hitler, Beso Djugashvili and Ekaterina Galatza, Joseph Stalin's parents, Andruta and Mari Ceausescu, parents of Nicolae Ceausescu, the genocidal Romanian leader, and a few similar others, and then the punchline: if only these people had heard of Trojan condoms. The commercial spoke a truth, that families are involved and responsible for the good ones and the monsters alike. We have all heard so much about the campaigns and conquests and cruelties of world leaders, and we have heard stories of incidents that might have influenced their growing years. But history is rather quiet on the roles that their mothers might have played. Yes, what about mom? How did mom mess with their heads? The most definitive record of this truth, that is the family's role in history, was written by my guest today, Simon Sebag Montefiore, in his book, The World, A Family History, which I will refer to as The World. The World opens with the discovery of footprints. In 2013, a storm lashed the eastern coast of England at Norfolk in a small village called Haysborough and uncovered these footprints. They found out that these footprints had been left behind some 850,000 years ago by a small group of humans, adults and children, the first evidence of family. A blurb in The World points out that from the beginning of history through the present, the one thing that humanity has had in common is family. The book reveals how the family unit has driven history from those prehistoric Homo antecessors of Haysborough to the modern days, the Trumps included. The book has such a huge span. In over 1,300 pages, it takes us through recorded history as we know it, and in a never-done-before narrative, presents the history of the world through the families that have caused and created history, families from every corner of the world. Therefore, this book is nothing short of a modern-day epic. To those who may not have had the pleasure of reading Simon Sebag Montefiore, let me say that his prose is not only deep, but gripping. And let not the size of the book fool you. It is unputdownable, and call me if it doesn't go faster than binge-watching Game of Thrones, with as much guts and gore and sex, by the way. Simon Sebag Montefiore is one of the world's best-known historians, a prodigious biographer of world leaders, and to call him a prolific writer would be to understate the truth. A little over a week ago, Simon was traveling in Bangalore, and I was given the honor of doing this interview to a live audience at the famous Blossom Book House. I asked the audience to give him a warm Bangalore welcome.
Thank you so much.
And now, Simon Sebag Montefiore, welcome to the Literary City.
And before we even go on, I just want to say, first of all, that is just the most wonderful introduction.
Thank you.
Secondly, I am so thrilled to be here with one of Bangalore's favourite sons.
My privilege.
And I'm very honoured that you're doing this with me. So I'm so pleased that you agreed.
Oh, the privilege is ours. Well, let me jump in. To start with a rather formulaic question, what drove you to write this book?
I mean, one of the things I really wanted to do was to avoid the fact that many world histories are a little distant from the humans that they purport to explain. Many world histories are full of trade routes and commodities and technological developments. On the other hand, biographies are often far too focused and far too big. And so what I wanted to do was to find a way to combine the span, the breadth of world history with the intimacy, the juice, if you like, of biography. And I try to think of a way to do this.
And what was that process?
As you know, Andrew, when we writers make a proposal, the publishers say, will you write a paragraph? And then you write it. And then about 6 months later, you have to write the damn thing. And that can be a bit of a problem. So I had a terrible prospect of writing this book. I wanted to write it because no one had written it yet. But I needed to find a way to link it all together. And then it occurred to me that family is the answer. Everyone has a family. But also family sagas are a genre that people understand.
Right.
And I wanted to find a way to make this book accessible for anybody who may not know any history. And so family is the way to do it.
From an urban middle-class perspective, we understand the word family to mean husband, wife, 2.2 kids and a dog. How does this translate to, say, world leaders like Ivan the Terrible? You've written extensively about Russia. What's family in that context?
Well, I mean, as I said, I approached it in a very flexible way. On one hand, this is a history of the nature of the structure of nuclear families, which of course are really decided by the technology and medical development of child rearing on one hand, and the nature of work and working on the other hand. So that's one approach to family. But I'm also a historian of power, and so of course I follow the families that ruled Russia, for example, which you mentioned. Mm-hmm. Ivan the Terrible is fascinating. I mean, he was a lunatic ultimately. Equally interesting is Peter the Great, who really made the Romanov dynasty, his family, into the most powerful, most successful family of modern times. What they both had in common was they personified a flaw in family politics.
How exactly?
They both killed their eldest son.
Huh. How did Peter the Great and Ivan the Terrible kill their oldest sons?
Ivan the Terrible, in a fury, struck his eldest son with the staff which Tsars carried before the Romanov dynasty, but the Rurikid Tsars carried a staff like a spear with a metal point. And he got so furious with the son that he stabbed him and killed him, and then wept in despair. And of course, in doing that, he actually effectively destroyed his own family. Peter the Great did something very similar. He was the most fascinating of all these characters. I mean, he's one person I love writing about. I mean, he was 6'7". He had a twitching face, so he was kind of not just a sort of giant, but a sort of twitching giant. And you know, he partied like crazy. I mean, he was really like, you know, Led Zeppelin on tour.
Right.
In the 70s. He you know, people died of alcohol poisoning all the time at his parties. People killed each other at the parties, and naked girls and dwarfs, and jumped out of cakes. And people literally, two of his chief ministers actually died of alcohol poisoning at these parties. So, but, you know, he was a brutal character. I mean, he tortured many people to death, all his opponents to death. When one of his mistresses, one of his lovers, was caught killing a baby, killing a newborn fetus to hide the fact that she was pregnant, she didn't believe that he would do anything about it. But in fact, he walked her to the gallows and watched as she was beheaded. And when she was beheaded, she thought that he would forgive her at the last minute. He didn't. He said, "You're a murderer." And when she was beheaded with a beautiful 18-year-old head falling to the floor, he picked it up, kissed the lips, and then gave the crowd a lesson about anatomy.
You know, even the worst despots in the world need some sort of public support to be able to continue their claim to legitimacy of the throne or their seat of power. Now, in the corporate world, it's fairly common for the succession to be hereditary on the account of, say, being custodians of the shares owned by the family. How have dynasties done it?
What you're asking is actually the key question in the book, which is, how come it is that in the 21st century, in this age of iPhones and artificial intelligence, how is it that still family is the most common system of rule? I mean, obviously there are lots of facades. There are lots of what I called cosplay democracies that looked like democracies. All the states that were founded after 1945 either had a prime minister system, obviously like you have, but most of them have the American system of a presidency, and they have elections, and they have a sort of assembly, elected assembly. Many of them actually, though, are just monarchies in effect, or autocracies at least. The reason family has been so useful, so familiar, is exactly that. The familial is familiar to us. And when we look at these ruling families, we know they're a bit different, but we know they're also the same. We understand the dynamics in the family. But the deeper reason is that all political systems are a quest for stability and security and continuity. What we most fear, each of us in our hearts, is something unpredictable that's going to happen to us in our comfortable lives. And all these systems are really designed to invent ways to try and provide continuity.
So are you saying that these systems have their advantages?
And they all have disadvantages.
Right.
The disadvantage with democracies is they're totally inconsistent. Every 4 years or every 10 years, you get another complete different party. That's the idea anyway. And sometimes it doesn't happen. But that's the idea. And the great thing about it is you can get rid of them, in the end. In autocracy, on the other hand, you have stability, because one man makes the rules and he knows the system. And you may not choose him really, but if you believe that he's there for you, he's your guy, what do a few elections matter? The great upside is you can be very quick at making decisions. You can march into Crimea whenever you want. You can make decisions that would take democracies 2 years to make. You can make a decision like that. But the downside of that system is you can't get rid of them. And they're very rigid because they're just one man getting older. Dynasties solve that problem, but they have another problem: succession. The great thing about them is whether they're the Nehrus and the Kennedys, or whether they're some sort of dictatorial autocracy, a Padishah, a Mughals, or the Habsburgs, is that you know what you're going to get, basically. And the family is familiar to you, and if it's been around a long time, it has enormous prestige, reassurance, and you sort of know the people around the people who are going to succeed.
Although, from your book, I gather that these laws of succession haven't always been crystal clear, have they? What have been the exceptions?
Now, in the steppe dynasties, which the Mughals are one, the Tamerlane family, the Ottomans,
right,
these Turkish Mongol families, they had a system where you don't have a law of inheritance at all. The ruler can choose who they like, but that doesn't even matter, because what really matters is that the strongest prince will challenge the other princes, whatever the father wants, and they will be supported by their mothers. As you mentioned mothers, that's what this
right.
book is. A lot of it is about mothers. The idea was a kind of a good one, is that the stronger one would be the most able, and he would be the most efficient at preserving the empire, and that worked quite well in the Mughals for about 100 years. Worked quite well in the Ottomans for about 200 years. But it goes wrong when the system becomes corrupt and inefficient. Then these battles can actually destroy the entire state. And of course, that's what happened with the Mughals.
Right. And about mothers, you've done something that hasn't been done before. You've actually sought out the women and included them.
Yeah, that was one of the ideas of the book as well. Was that women are left out of a lot of histories. And when I was growing up and did history, I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, women got kind of left out of the history. There were virtually no women. There were a couple of nurses, and that was it. But there was a shortage of women, and I wanted to put women back. And of course, in families, women are really important. In politics, women are really important. In the arts, women are really important. But are women better rulers than men?
Are they?
No, but they're no worse. They're just as capable, and they're just as corrupt and brutal as men are. They're just as capable. I mean, some of the most capable people in this book are women. But women, researching women has been one of the most fun things about making this book.
You spoke at length about how all families are essentially hybrids, and therefore so are peoples and dynasties. And essentially, they're all made up of people who either invaded a country or settled in it as migrants. How would you describe how that features in your book?
It's a book about diversity. Whether it's good or bad, whether you like it or not, I think it's the most truly global and most diverse history of the world ever written.
And I don't think anyone can dispute that. Your book has such a huge span. You have tracked down the histories of little-known places in the world. And I can point them out on a map, but it ends there. And having read the whole book, and this is for the benefit of the listeners, you have connected how history moves across the world. Something in South America has something in common with something that happened around the same time in the Middle East, for instance. Now, a project of this magnitude, was it daunting?
Yeah, really daunting. I just want to say that what you were just describing actually brilliantly is that I wanted the book to reflect the messiness of human life. Like so many of the books we read are just, the dynasty of Chandragupta and Ashoka, or just the Herods in the Middle East, or just the Tudors, and they ignore things that are happening right next door. There are also many histories of, say, the British in India, and we're all very obsessed with empires at the moment, which is a good, interesting thing. But as I was saying earlier, that ignores all the other people who were invading India at exactly the same time, and with absolutely eye-watering bloodshed. Ahmad Chadarani in invasions of India, astonishing. Literally cartloads of murdered women. So you've really put it perfectly. Thank you. And was it daunting? It was totally daunting. Ladies and gentlemen, I am barely alive.
I imagine.
I signed up to do this book. COVID has been a tragedy for many people, but for writers, it was a quiet time to write, a sanctuary.
True.
And I was able, my wife and children and dog, my Labrador Simba, they all went to the country. So I was on my own in London, living like, as they say in mafia films, I sort of went to the mattresses.
Right.
I was just living very efficiently, waking at dawn, writing all day until I was exhausted, and then going for a run, and then eating, and then going to sleep, and then starting again. And I did, it was so daunting, Ramjee. It was such a good question. It was very, I didn't sleep properly for about 2.5 years.
And that is the other thing that's not going to be disputed. Now, you've tracked the history of the world from those footprints in Hillsborough to the present day. In the period following World War II, clearly the world tried to correct and improve itself. We set up institutions like the United Nations, and indeed there has been much improvement in matters of women's rights and gay rights and the ending of apartheid, for instance. Yet, only 70-something years later, there seems to be a strong pull away from these liberal democratic policies of egalitarianism and so on. So, what is this? As a historian of the world, have the last 75 years just been a blip in history, a failed or failing experiment?
I don't think it's a failed experiment, and in many places some of those gains will last, but not all of them. And we don't know which ones yet, but they will be challenged. What we now realize is, I say in the book, normal disorder has been restored.
Yes.
There are very few periods in world history where, for a short period, two powers have created a bipolar world. And you were just mentioning, the big changes that have happened in the world. So during the last 70 years, extraordinary period when you had these two very great powers, and they had nuclear weapons. Most other people didn't yet, and this enabled them to keep a certain equilibrium, providing they fought their wars through proxies, which they did, and it's still going on in sort of spasms. But it was all fine, providing we didn't have wars in the great powers and in Europe and in the Americas. But now that's changed, and it's been partly caused by the fall of the Soviet Union, which was regarded as a victory by America, but actually caused great instability.
And you were right there, weren't you, as a young journalist with a ringside seat? Was it fun?
Great period of adventure for me. But when I went there, I mean, it was fascinating for a young historian to see. And I do think that, the essential training for any historian is to see a great empire fall in detail, in person. And I did see that. And I had many great adventures there. But I realized that, of course, America didn't really want the Soviet Union to collapse. And so we see what's happening now. Part of it was moral, and that's what you quite rightly mentioned. Gay rights, female rights, the pill, a lot of these amazing gains, which many of us support. I support them. Were astonishing, gave astonishing freedom to women for the first time ever, and many of them are a challenge now in many different parts of the world. I mean, I was talking to someone the other day. They said, try being gay in Jamaica, try being gay in Uganda, try being gay in Russia now. So these things are at risk.
As is liberal democracy itself, it would seem. And also, families are still there. They haven't gone anywhere, have they?
Family power is alive and well, even in democracies like Singapore, where the son of the founder is still prime minister. And I don't know if you call Pakistan a democracy or what you call it. It's a sort of hybrid, isn't it? But look at the government there now. It's got a Bhutto as foreign minister, a Sharif as prime minister. So family power is still really strong. There are all sorts of countries in South Asia, East Asia, and West Asia, of course, the Middle East, of course. Family power is actually resurging in a surprising way. So something is going on here.
Was there ever in history a liberal democracy in the manner that we idealize it today?
Not quite, but we've done pretty well with some of them.
In this ever-changing world order, Samuel Huntington famously wrote in Clash of Civilizations that with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the new enemy will be Islam, and it won't be the Arabs, but the Turks who will be the new power center. Now, Vladimir Putin is having none of this, is he?
No.
You say he's quite the imperialist.
Yes, what's very interesting about that idea, it's a completely random idea. Something different could just as easily happen. And the world is imaginable without Russia as the colossal federation that it is today.
Are you saying that it is likely that it might not continue to be a colossal federation?
And it may well be that Putin will rule it into the ground, and that this state, which has depended throughout history on military success as the justification and legitimization of the ruler, that has always been the essential deal in Russian autocracy. You can have absolute power, you and your little group of your little coterie of warlords, noblemen, oligarchs. You can amass vast wealth. In fact, I'll give you vast wealth because I like you. That little group can rule with the autocrat in return for security and prosperity at home and glory abroad. But now, if there are various things that can happen. One is that there's a frozen war, like Israel and the countries around it for a long time, which means that Putin and Russia can disable Ukraine forever to be ever a normal country, though it will become a military country like Israel did, and there are parallels between these countries. Another possibility, which also looks quite likely, is that Russia will be defeated totally on the battlefield, and if that happens, that will not be tolerated by either the people or Putin's own circle.
And that would mean Putin is out?
That means Putin's out. But I don't think Putin will go anywhere as long as he's alive.
That's telling.
I've written several books about what happens to people when they lose power in Russia. But Putin could still learn.
So you're not writing him off just yet?
We can't write him off yet. There's a lot of things that could happen.
Now, on the fun side, your book is replete with very interesting and indeed funny anecdotes, like this one from the house of Constantine when Diocletian retired to grow cabbages. And the characters from the 17th century, 16th and 17th century, quite a collection of them, quite a blast. And you have Abbas the First, who gets thrown to the carpet by his harem girls and boys crying out, "Ah, you trumpets, you crazy things." It's full of stuff like this. And on a more sober note, though, there's your description of the conversation between Rajiv and Sonia Gandhi just after Indira Gandhi had been assassinated. They're hugging in the hospital. Rajiv keeps kissing Sonia's forehead. And Sonia is trying to keep Rajiv from accepting the prime ministership. She argues that he will be killed. And Rajiv replies saying that he will be killed anyway. And you write, "Such is the grinding logic of hereditary power."
Yes.
Truer words. And now to close out, this is your magnum opus.
Well, I mean, I don't think I'll ever write it. I'll never write anything like this again.
And I'll end with a formulaic question like I began. What will you do for an encore?
Well, there's going to be no encore to this, because this is a book that could only have been written in special circumstances of COVID, I think, because lockdown. I mean, and also the ambition of it has made my brain ache with the strain of doing this.
But it was rewarding.
Earlier you touched on the sort of part of it. I mean, part of it has to be scholarship in these books.
Right.
So what I did was to get that. I'm the sort of person that's never embarrassed to sit at people's feet of greater brains.
Mm-hmm.
And so this book, as you see from the acknowledgements, I've been to so many historians.
True.
And I got them to read the book and correct it. Of course, some of them incredibly rude. They just wrote absolute rubbish, myth, take it out, But I always did, because that was the way. But then the other half of it is writing, and I sweat blood to make these books elegant in the writing and gripping in the narrative, because it's all about the narrative. And it doesn't matter how long a book is, it has to have that sort of the big momentum. And so I'm really pleased that you like the book. And from you, these are great compliments, I have to tell you.
You're being kind.
From you.
Well, thank you. Well, it has been an honor and a privilege to be able to do this interview with one of the world's best-known historians, as I said before, a prodigious biographer, a prolific writer, and I am running out of large adjectives here.
My head is spinning.
Thank you so much for being here and for making Bangalore a stop. Ladies and gentlemen, Simon Sebag Montefiore.
Thank you very much. It's been the greatest pleasure. What a lovely interview. Thank you so much.
You have been listening to Simon Sebag Montefiore, historian, journalist, and author of this huge and wonderful book, The World, A Family History. And I will be back next week with the extremely interesting Kamini Dandapani, the New York-based author of the book Rajaraja Chola. This is the Literary City podcast with me, Ramjee Chandran, on the always fun, always entertaining IndigoMusic.com.